Hi, this is Jerry McLaughlin, co-author of the book Cold Wax Medium, Techniques, Concepts, and Conversations, and co-producer of Cold Wax Medium, a video workshop. Welcome to Ask Jerry and Rebecca, a video series answering all your questions about cold wax medium. Hi, and welcome to this episode of Ask Jerry and Rebecca. I'm coming to you again from my new-ish home in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. And today's question covers a broad topic, basically about the history of cold wax medium, the different types of cold wax medium, and how do you make it. And I tried to put all of that together into a single episode, and it comes to us from several people. Sue Kirchner, Steve Cobb, Rhonda Campbell, Vicky Sharp, Terry Gerard Diamond, Catalina Triana, and Peter Finley. And all of them had questions about cold wax medium that I'm going to cover today. So a few people asked about the history of cold wax medium. And if you have our book, I would encourage you to read that section. We go into quite a bit of detail there. But when talking about the history of cold wax medium, it's important to define what you mean by cold wax medium. So if all you mean is a paste-like consistency of wax that you can use to apply pigments or something else that doesn't require any heat, then that probably goes back several thousand years, probably nearly as far back as encaustic processes go. And they, Greeks and some other ancient cultures, took wax and boiled it and treated it with a variety of chemicals that changed it so that it would be a paste at room temperature, and then you could paint with that and you didn't need to use heat to melt it. Now, that's not what we typically think of as cold wax medium today. What we typically think of as cold wax medium today is a mixture of beeswax and maybe some other waxes with a solvent. So that solvent is what makes the beeswax soft at room temperature. There's no chemical alteration of the wax itself. And for that to happen, you really need solvents. And solvents really came about with the turpentine industry in the late 19th century. So what we would consider to be modern day cold wax medium, where you have a solvent plus beeswax, really came to be in the late 19th century. It didn't gain very much in popularity during that time because of one specific thing, and that was that people didn't have electricity. So the only way that you could melt wax to add the turpentine was over usually some kind of open flame, and turpentine and other solvents are very flammable. So making cold wax medium was a fairly risky process. So in the 20th century, when electricity became much more available to people, that's when we saw modern day cold wax medium come into more popular use. And it was probably Dorland's cold wax medium was the first commercial version available as far as we can tell. And I was able to actually speak to Frank Dorland's wife before she unfortunately had a stroke and couldn't provide any more information. But he originally invented Dorland's cold wax medium as a preservative to cover oil paintings, but it didn't end up to be a very good protector because the wax actually tended to attract dust. So they didn't use it very much for that, but they did discover that it was a really nice oil painting medium. Arthur Dove is probably the most well-known artist to use what we would consider to be a modern-day cold wax medium in the early and mid-20th century. And perhaps there were other artists that were using some variation of cold wax medium that they were mixing together themselves. But many people then would not have labeled their painting as cold wax medium or anything else. They would have just said an oil painting and then not really mentioned the other mediums that they use. So I think it's very hard to know the specifics of that. The next part of the question that people asked was, what are the differences between the two major cold wax mediums out there? And there are two big producers, and that's Dorland, made by Jacquard, and then Gamblin's cold wax medium. I'm going to tell you that Rebecca and I don't have any specific allegiance to one or the other as a cold wax medium, but we do use pretty much exclusively Gamblin's cold wax medium, mostly because of their customer service. And that is, you can usually get somebody on the phone pretty quickly when you have a question. The other reason that we use it is because they have tested it with basically all of their oil paints and their oil painting mediums and found them to be compatible. Now, that doesn't mean that Dorland's is not compatible. It just hasn't been tested as far as we know. Um, they are similar in that they're both a mixture of predominantly beeswax and an odorless mineral spirit. The difference comes in when you look at the waxes. So Gamblin uses exclusively beeswax, but Dorland adds a little bit of microcrystalline wax to theirs. And microcrystalline wax is a wax that comes from processing crude oil. And microcrystalline waxes have really good flexibility, and some of them have really good transparency. And so they add that because they think that it gives a better body and flexibility to their wax. The other difference is around the hardening agent. And you generally need some kind of hardening agent when you're using cold wax and oils if you want a more durable surface. Now, it's not an absolute. You could just use beeswax, solvent, and oil paints. But the surface will dry faster and harder if you add some kind of resin to it. Gamblin uses alkyd resin. So when you use Gamblin's cold wax medium, basically every layer of your painting has some degree of alkyd resin in it because it's present in their cold wax medium. Dorland uses Damar resin, which is the same resin that most people use in encaustic medium. And that's a natural resin that does essentially the same thing. It adds some sheen, and then it also adds some drying speed, and it also makes the surface more durable when the whole thing polymerizes and oxidizes. So those are the main kind of chemical differences. Now, obviously, there's going to be differences in consistency and color and smell and things like that. I don't think I need to go into those here. I think you can just try both and see which one you like the most. People have said, and I've noticed, that Gamblin's tends to be more light and fluffy and less tacky, and Dorland's tends to be more dense and a bit sticky. Now, that doesn't mean anything other than that, as far as using it in your cold wax paintings. The final part of this question is about making your own cold wax medium. Dorland's is available in the United States and perhaps Canada, but beyond that, their distribution is pretty small. Gamblin cold wax medium is available in several countries throughout the world, and I would encourage you to go to their website. They actually have a store locator, and you can look up what countries they distribute to. I know it's available here in Mexico. It's available in Canada. It's available in the UK, in the Netherlands, and I believe in Germany as well. There may be more countries that I don't know about. But, it's also available in Australia and New Zealand, I forgot, excuse me. That being said, it is very expensive once you start to purchase it outside of the United States. And that has to do with shipping because it's considered a hazardous product. It has to be shipped on a boat, not a plane. And that just adds significantly to the expense. So although it is available, many artists find the cost prohibitive and so resort to making their own. I'm not going to go into specific recipes here. We have specific recipes in the book, and there are some recipes online. Basically, you need to have beeswax, and not the yellow, unprocessed beeswax. You need to have the white beeswax that's either chemically treated, which I prefer not to use, or the highly filtered beeswax, which is white and supposed to be used for encaustic medium. That's what I prefer. You need to have some kind of solvent, and usually that solvent's going to be odorless mineral spirits, but some people do use other solvents, specifically D-limonene or the other orange-based solvents, and we talk about that in our book. There's now a product in the UK that is a solvent-free cold wax. Um, I don't know exactly what that makeup is because it's proprietary, and I'm not going to comment too much about it because I haven't actually used it. Are some minor brands of cold wax medium that use a variety of other solvents like turpentine, linseed oil, some other things. We have a whole chart in our book that goes over those quite specifically. So if you do want to make your own, you're going to need the beeswax, some kind of solvent, and ideally some kind of resin or hardener so that it dries faster and dries to a more durable surface. And that could either be alkyd resin or Damar resin. I am going to mention, just from a safety perspective, that if you are going to make your own, be very careful about heating the solvent. And I would encourage you not to use any open flames and to instead use a hot, like a griddle or something like that you would use for encaustic, and then do a water bath so that you really, really can control the temperature. And I would also encourage you to make it outside, because those vapors are going to get up into the air, and even a spark of static electricity could start a fire. So I'm not trying to discourage you from making your own. I have made my own before. But just be safe about it. And please do take a look at our book, because we talk about the safety measures, we talk about recipes, and a whole variety of other things. So I hope that that answers this rather long and involved but not complicated question. Thanks for joining. Next time.